Before the first needle pierced skin, before the first measurement was recorded in sterile ledgers, the machinery of medical transgression was assembled through conference rooms and correspondence. The trajectory began not in the barbed wire enclosures of Auschwitz, but in the respectable halls of German academia and the administrative offices of the SSWVHA, where eugenics theories fermented into practical genocide, and where science bent itself to the service of an ideology that denied the very humanity it claimed to study. In July 1942, a conference convened in Berlin. Its participants included Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler, Professor Karl Gebhardt, and Richard Glucks, the inspector of concentration camps. The subject of their deliberations, the development of methods for mass sterilization, techniques that could render vast populations reproductively inert without their knowledge, swiftly and economically. Professor Karl Klauberg, a gynecologist of considerable reputation who had built his career treating infertility at the hospital in Chorzów, received this extraordinary commission. As one historical document records, the task was explicit: to devise a method which would lead to sterilization of persons without their knowledge, a method whose success would mean that the sterilization of Jewesses could then be carried out in actuality. The choice of Auschwitz was deliberate, strategic. Established in 1940 in occupied Poland, the Auschwitz complex had expanded by 1942 to include Birkenau, Auschwitz II, where a women's sector opened in March. Here existed what administrators termed abundant material, a limitless supply of human subjects stripped of legal protection, isolated from witnesses, expendable. By December 1942, Klauberg began his work in Barrack 30 of the Birkenau Women's Hospital. By April 1943, he relocated to Block 10 of the main camp, a two-story brick building that would become synonymous with systematic violation, cloaked in clinical procedure. The institutional architecture supporting these endeavors stretched beyond Auschwitz's electrified perimeter. The Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Anthropology, Human Heredity, and Eugenics in Berlin-Dahlem, Germany's premier research institution, became intimately entangled with camp operations. In October 1942, Professor Ottmar Freiherr von Verschuer assumed directorship of the institute, bringing with him a particular passion for twin studies and phenogenetic research. Phenogenetic research, especially on humans, needs an abundant store of embryological material, the Institute's founder, Eugen Fischer, had written in 1940. It will take a lot of time to collect it. A central collection should be built up by systematically assembling human and animal embryogenios derived from pathological lines and diverse races. This network of complicity extended through pharmaceutical corporations like Schering, which supplied chemical agents, through university anatomy departments that received specimens, through the German Research Foundation that provided funding grants. By 1943, the bureaucratic machinery hummed with efficiency, transforming concentration camp prisoners into raw data, their bodies into research materials catalogued and shipped to laboratories across the Reich. They arrived bearing doctorates and decorated service records, men whose credentials sparkled with academic distinction and whose hands would wield instruments not for healing, but for harm measured, documented and rationalized as contribution to science. Eduard Wirz embodied the paradox most completely. Born in 1909 to a Catholic family with democratic socialist leanings, Wirz became an ardent Nazi while studying medicine at the University of Würzburg between 1930 and 1935. He joined the Nazi Party and SA in June 1933. After seeing combat in Norway and on the Russian front, a heart attack in spring 1942 rendered him medically unfit for frontline service. In September 1942, at age 33, he arrived at Auschwitz as SS Hauptsturmführer and chief camp physician, a position that made him formally responsible for everything undertaken by nearly 20 SS doctors working in the camp's medical sections between 1942 and 1945. Robert J. Lifton's post-war interviews revealed Worths as a man described as meticulous, obedient, and unusually conscientious and reliable, compassionate and soft in his responses to others. He never smoked or drank. Yet this same physician personally performed selections at the ramp, asserting medical control over determinations of who would live as slave labor and who would be immediately dispatched. Medical historian E.W.J. Pierce later observed of Worth's work, Worths, without consent, photographed the services of women prisoners, then amputated the pictured services and sent both photographs and specimens for study to Dr. Hinzelmann of Berlin. Josef Mengele arrived at Auschwitz on May 30th, 1943, carrying dual doctorates in anthropology and medicine. Born March 16, 1911, in the Bavarian city of Günzburg to a prosperous manufacturing family, Mengele had earned his PhD in physical anthropology from the University of Munich in 1935 and his medical degree in 1938. In Frankfurt, he had worked under Verschuer at the Institute for Hereditary Biology and Racial Hygiene, studying genetic factors in cleft palates. Wounded on the Eastern Front near Rostov-on-Don in 1942, decorated with the Iron Cross First Class and the Wound Badge, he transferred to desk duty in Berlin. Historical evidence suggests Mengele requested assignment to Auschwitz in consultation with his mentor, Verschuer. The transfer served dual purpose. Mengele would function as camp physician while simultaneously serving as scientific associate of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute. As one camp document notes, Verschuer received regular reports and shipments of specimens from Mengele, blood samples, organs, skeletons, and body parts extracted from prisoners and shipped north to Berlin for analysis. The German Research Foundation provided funding for this collaboration. One grant specifically supported construction of a pathology laboratory attached to Crematorium II at Birkenau. Karl Klauberg brought impeccable professional credentials. Born September 28, 1898, this professor of the University of Königsberg had established himself as an authority on infertility treatment before the war. His gynecological clinic in Chorzów served civilian patients. His methods for treating childlessness had brought joy to SS families. Now Himmler commissioned him for the opposite work, perfecting sterility en masse. In correspondence to the Reichsführer dated June 7, 1943, Klauberg wrote with bureaucratic precision, "The non-surgical method of sterilizing women that I have invented is now almost perfected. If the research that I am carrying out continues to yield the sort of results that it has produced so far, then I shall be able to report in the foreseeable future that one experienced physician with an appropriately equipped office and the aid of 10 auxiliary personnel will be able to carry out in the course of a single day the sterilization of hundreds or even 1,000 women." Horst Schumann complemented Klauberg's chemical approach with radiological methods. Born May 1, 1906, in Halle, Schumann had entered the Nazi Party in 1930, the SA in 1932, and received his medical degree in 1933. Before Auschwitz, he had directed euthanasia institutions at Grafeneck and Sonnenstein, where he supervised the carbon monoxide asphyxiation of thousands deemed incurably ill or unworthy of life. He arrived at Auschwitz on July 28, 1941, initially to conduct selections for the T4 program's continuation in the camps. By 1942, he had established an X-ray sterilization station in Barrack 30 of the Birkenau women's camp, equipped with 2 Siemens X-ray machines connected to a lead-shielded control cabin from which he operated the equipment. These were not marginal figures or incompetent quacks. They were representatives of German medical science at its institutional apex, their actions sanctioned by research grants, their results anticipated by university departments, their methods discussed in administrative memoranda that treated human destruction as technical problem solving. Block 10 stood as an ordinary brick building in the Auschwitz, the main camp, indistinguishable externally from neighboring barracks. Yet within its walls unfolded a systematic inversion of medical ethics, healing transformed into harm, clinical examination weaponized into instrument of demographic warfare. Between 150 and 400 Jewish women from across Nazi-occupied Europe lived in 2 upstairs rooms. Weekly employment records listed them as Häftlinge für Versuchszwecke, prisoners for experimental purposes. They came from the Netherlands and Belgium, from Slovakia and Poland, from Greece, Germany, and France. As one survivor account specified, Klauberg selected women for his experiments primarily from the newly arriving transports. At registration, they were asked, among others, whether they had given birth and whether they still had periods. Dutch survivor Mitty Harpman, born in Amsterdam in 1902, gave testimony before a Soviet tribunal in February 1945, describing her experience. Professor Klauberg arrived in Auschwitz concentration. I was made to lie on a black table, and over me a white pane with a light was placed. The light in this operating theatre was switched off. Next, a photographic device was inserted. Then they took a photo. That experiment was conducted by Professor Klauberg himself. There was another German physician with him. I don't know his name. She continued. An identical experiment was repeated 2 weeks later, and again after another 2 weeks. Apart from these experiments, I had 3 injections, and after several days 9 more, all at once. In July 1944, Professor Klauberg came again and said that I was no longer suitable for experiments, and so they took me to Birkenau. The procedures Klauberg perfected involved introducing caustic chemical irritants, initially iodipine, followed by formaldehyde solutions of varying concentrations, into the cervix and uterus without anesthesia. The substances produced severe inflammation designed to fuse the fallopian tubes, shut through adhesion and scarring. Women experienced what medical records antiseptically termed fever, peritonitis, and profuse bleeding of the genital tracts. The pain was described by survivors as comparable to childbirth. Some subjects perished from infection, hemorrhage, or septic shock. Others were transferred to Birkenau and the gas chambers so that post-mortem examinations could document the efficacy of the occlusions. Klauberg's assistant operations relied on a coerced medical staff. Dr. Alina Broda, a Polish Jewish gynecological, directed much of the nursing personnel. Sylvia Friedman, a Slovak Jewish woman, drafted medical documentation for all Block 10 inmates. Most remarkably, French physician Dr. Adélaïde Hautval, not Jewish herself but arrested for resistance activity, refused orders directly connected to administering the sterilization injections, telling Klauberg that such acts violated her medical oath. She survived to give testimony. Meanwhile, in Barrack 30 at Birkenau, Schumann conducted his radiological sterilization trials. Jakob Skurnik, a Polish Jew, testified in February 1945. In December 1942, the leader of my block announced that all men aged 18 to 30 were not going to work on the following day. They began to run us through X-ray machines in pairs. He described standing between 2 X-ray machines targeting the reproductive organs, the exposure lasting several minutes. The aftermath was catastrophic. The exposure produced severe radiation burns on the abdomen, groin, and buttocks that developed within days into hard-to-heal centers of purulent inflammation. Survivors reported that the parts of the body that were treated with the rays were burnt, suppurating. Often the intestines were also affected. Many perished. By April 1944, Schumann compiled his findings in an article titled "The Effect of X-ray Radiation on the Human Reproductive Glands." His conclusion was professionally disappointing. X-ray sterilization proved unsatisfactory, the radiation doses difficult to calibrate, the complications severe. He recommended surgical castration instead as quicker and more certain. The banality of such calculations, measuring human sterilization in minutes per procedure, calculating throughput in hundreds or thousands per day, revealed the fundamental transformation. Persons reduced to units, suffering quantified as experimental variables, agony dismissed as acceptable cost in the pursuit of demographic engineering. In the spring and summer of 1944, Hungarian transports disgorged tens of thousands of Jewish families onto the Birkenau arrival ramp. SS physicians conducted selections, sorting arrivals into those deemed fit for labor and those destined for immediate extermination. Among the cacophony of families torn apart, Josef Mengele moved with particular purpose, listening for a specific word: Zwillinge, twins. Eva Moses, aged 10, arrived from the Chehe ghetto in May 1944 with her twin sister Miriam, two older sisters, and their parents. An SS guard approached Eva's mother during the selection and tricked her into revealing that Eva and Miriam were twins, historical accounts record. The twins were immediately taken away despite her mother's protests. Kaur said that was the last time she ever saw her mother. Her arms were stretched out in despair as she was pulled away. I never even got to say goodbye to her, but I didn't really understand that this would be the last time we would see her. Historian Nicholas Waxman estimates Mengele studied as many as 1,000 sets of twins during his tenure at Auschwitz. Polish anthropologist Dr. Martina Puzina, herself imprisoned at Auschwitz after arrest for underground resistance work in March 1943, was eventually assigned to Mengele's twin research project. According to her post-war testimony, approximately 250 pairs of twins were selected from the Hungarian transports alone. The studies commenced with exhaustive anthropometric examination. Eva Kaur later testified, "Monday, Wednesday, Friday, they would put me naked in a room with my twin sister and many other twins, up to 8 hours a day. They would measure every part of my body, compare it to my twin sister, and then compare charts." Puzina and her assistants took anatomical measurements, created plaster casts of teeth and jaws, recorded fingerprints and toe prints, conducted hearing tests and ophthalmological examinations. The sessions were painful and exhausting, lasting hours. On alternate days came the blood work. Kaur described the routine. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, they would take us to a blood lab. They would tie both of my arms to restrict the blood flow, take a lot of blood from my left arm, and give me a minimum of 5 injections in the right arm. The content of those injections we didn't know then, nor do we know today. After one such injection, Eva became gravely ill, her fever spiking dangerously. Dr. Mengele came in next morning with 4 other doctors, she recalled in a 1992 statement. He looked at my fever chart and he said, laughing sarcastically, "Too bad, she's so young. She has only 2 weeks to live." I would fade in and out of consciousness. I would keep telling myself, "I must survive. I must survive." Years later, Eva learned the terrifying logic behind that death sentence. As she testified, "Would I have died? My twin sister Miriam would have been rushed immediately to Mengele's lab, inflicted with a phenol injection to the heart. Then Mengele would have done the comparative autopsies. That is the way most of the twins perished. Her survival spoiled the experimental protocol. The diseased subject should have expired, allowing comparison with the unaffected control. Instead, she rallied, and both sisters endured. The twin research fit for Schur's wider effort to identify specific proteins as racial markers. In reports to the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft in 1943–44, he acknowledged receiving blood samples from about 200 Auschwitz prisoners, taken from living subjects by Mengele and sent to Berlin for analysis. Mengele also pursued studies of heterochromia iridum, seeking genetic explanations for eye color. His colleague Karin Magnusson received at least 14 pairs of surgically removed heterochromous eyes from Auschwitz for preservation at the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, part of an attempt to replace outdated eye color tables with genetic diagnostics. Additional victims came from the Romani camp at Birkenau. During a 1943 outbreak of Noma among Romani youth, Mengele and prisoner physician Berthold Epstein documented experimental treatments, then deliberately withdrew them once they proved effective. Mengele attributed the disease to heredity rather than starvation. Preserved heads and organs were sent to the SS Medical Academy in Graz. Miklos Niesli, forced to serve as Mengele's pathologist, later described a system in which living subjects were studied and dissected so that organs and skeletons could be catalogued, Atrocity rendered as clinical data. Mengele cultivated a peculiar relationship with his twin subjects. Survivors recalled him bringing candy and toys, playing the benevolent uncle, creating an atmosphere of trust that made compliance easier. Mengele came in every morning after roll call to count us, Evakor testified. He wanted to know every morning how many guinea pigs he had. This dual nature, the physician who brought chocolate yet who permitted suffering to satisfy experimental curiosity, epitomized the moral catastrophe at Auschwitz's heart. Empathy severed from ethics, care divorced from humanity, scientific method weaponized against the subjects it studied. Beyond the prominent programs of sterilization and twin research, Auschwitz functioned as testing ground for pharmaceutical and physiological investigations, whose scope revealed the camp's transformation into laboratory without ethical constraint. Eduard Wirtz, beyond his administrative duties and cervical cancer research, engaged in pharmacological trials testing medications delivered to the camp by pharmaceutical companies. The most notable thing about Wirtz and his experiments, post-war analysis concluded, is that they were never carried out by himself. Not a single patient could recall him doing any of his own procedures. He supervised others while maintaining personal distance, a pattern of deniability that would complicate post-war accountability. Wehrmacht physician Emil Kaschub conducted experiments involving artificial infection, inoculating prisoners with disease agents to test treatment protocols. Photographic evidence preserved by prisoners employed in the camp's laboratory documents the inflammation, purulent lesions, and tissue damage resulting from his trials. SS physicians Friedrich Entress, Helmuth Vetter, and others tested medications produced by Bayer and other pharmaceutical firms on prisoners with infectious diseases, documenting responses on fever charts and mortality statistics. Professor Dr. Johann Paul Kremer, an anatomy professor from the University of Münster, arrived at Auschwitz to study metabolic changes in extreme starvation and the etiology of brown urine associated with liver failure. He personally selected extremely emaciated prisoners from the camp hospital, had them given lethal injections directly into the heart, and immediately harvested tissue samples from liver, pancreas, and spleen for preservation as research specimens. His diary entries from this period, later presented at trial, recorded his scientific observations alongside complaints about the quality of food in the SS mess. Bruno Weber, head of the hygienic institution at Block 10, conducted blood incompatibility experiments, injecting subjects with blood of mismatched types and studying the resulting cellular agglutination and hemolysis. When the Nazis removed blood from someone, medical historians note, they often entered a major artery, causing the subject to expire from major blood loss. Whether deliberate method or lethal incompetence remained ambiguous in post-war testimony. The scope of these additional experiments revealed Auschwitz's function as nexus point where military medicine, academic research ambitions, pharmaceutical profit motives, and ideological imperatives converged. The camp's isolation from external oversight, its population stripped of legal personhood, and the administrative culture that treated prisoners as expendable resources, created conditions where conventional restraints dissolved entirely. Physicians could pursue questions that ethics committees would never approve, testing hypotheses at will, documenting outcomes regardless of human cost. For those selected as experimental subjects, existence bifurcated into two overlapping torments: the general conditions of imprisonment at Auschwitz and the particular ordeal of serving as human research material. Evakor articulated this dual burden simply: at Auschwitz, dying was so easy, surviving was a full-time job. Twins and other experimental subjects lived in special barracks. The twins occupied quarters in the Birkenau family camp and later in separate buildings, receiving marginally better rations than general population prisoners. Mengele required his subjects alive and relatively stable for ongoing study. Yet this protection remained conditional, pragmatic, rather than humane. Over time, I could see that prisoners who had someone in the camp to care about, whether a relative, friend, or neighbor, were more likely to survive, Kaur observed. The prisoners who had no one did not last. Eva Kaur remembered constant hunger. I remember being hungry all the time. I had a big decision to make every night when we received our daily ration of bread, approximately 2.5 inches, whether to eat it immediately or save some for morning, weighing immediate hunger against strategic nutrition. Communication between prisoners contracted to essential whispers. During the whole time I was in Auschwitz, Miriam and I talked very little. All we could say to one another was, "Make sure you don't get sick, and do you have another piece of bread?" It took every ounce of my energy to survive one more day, to live through one more experiment. We did not cry because we knew there was no help. The women in Block 10 faced their own particular psychological torment. There was a constant fear in Block 10, survivor testimony recorded, of being dispatched, sterilized, or subjected to forced insemination by Klauberg. The experiments occurred under pretense of routine gynecological examinations, the true purpose concealed until the insertion of caustic substances produced agony that revealed the deception. Afterward, women endured fever, hemorrhage, and pain while maintaining the routines of camp life, roll calls, work assignments, the perpetual awareness that failure to appear functional could mean selection for extermination. Dr. Houtval's refusal to participate directly in sterilization injections represented moral courage that risked her own existence. Hungarian prisoner Erno Zvi Spiegel, working in camp administration, falsified records to protect some twins, an act of rescue documented in modern scholarship and commemorated through artifacts like a salvaged pen displayed in museum exhibitions. For experimental subjects, liberation by the Soviet Army on January 27, 1945, brought simultaneous deliverance and devastation. Eva and Miriam Moses numbered among approximately 180 youth, most of them twins, who survived Mengele's studies. A woman ran into our barrack yelling at the top of her voice, "We are free! We are free! We are free!" Eva recalled. Soviet soldiers appeared through the snow, wrapped in white, camouflage raincoats. They were smiling from ear to ear. They gave us chocolates, cookies, and hugs, and this was my first taste of freedom. Yet freedom came shadowed by enduring harm. When local nuns gave Eva and Miriam toys after liberation, Eva found the gesture in a strange way insulting because they did not understand that I was no longer a child and I was no longer playing with toys. The experiments had stolen something irretrievable beyond mere time. Miriam's kidneys, damaged by injections, never developed beyond pediatric size. Despite receiving a kidney transplant from Eva in 1987, Miriam perished in 1993, likely from complications stemming from what was inflicted upon her 5 decades earlier at age 10. As Soviet forces approached in January 1945, the SS initiated evacuation of Auschwitz. Mengele departed on the night of January 17th, salvaging what records he could, 2 boxes of specimens and experimental documentation. Most camp medical records had been systematically destroyed, ensuring that vast quantities of evidence vanished into smoke and ash. Eduard Wirtz fled west with other Auschwitz personnel, transferred to Mittelbau-Dora concentration camp, where he continued as chief physician until that camp's evacuation in April 1945. British forces captured him, and on September 20th, 1945, knowing he faced trial, Wirtz ended his own life through hanging in British detention. He was 36 years old. Karl Klauberg escaped to Ravensbrück concentration camp, where he continued sterilization experiments. Soviet troops captured him in 1945. In 1948, a Soviet tribunal sentenced him to 25 years imprisonment. In 1955, under the Adenauer-Bulganin prisoner exchange agreement, he returned to West Germany and astonishingly resumed medical practice. After outcry from survivor groups, German authorities arrested him in November 1955. He passed away in prison in Kiel on August 9, 1957, before his trial commenced, escaping final judgment. Horst Schumann proved more elusive. Released from American custody in 1945 due to failed identification, he fled Germany in 1951, eventually settling in Khartoum, Sudan, as head of a hospital, until an Auschwitz survivor recognized him in 1962. He fled to Ghana, receiving protection from President Kwame Nkrumah until that government's overthrow in 1966. Extradited to West Germany, his trial opened in Frankfurt on September 23, 1970. Released in July 1972 due to deteriorating health, he evaded full accountability, passing away in 1983. Josef Mengele escaped entirely. Fleeing through Gross-Rosen to Bavaria, he discarded his SS uniform for Wehrmacht clothing, was briefly detained by Americans who failed to identify him, and eventually made his way to South America. For decades he lived in Argentina, Paraguay, and finally Brazil, evading international manhunts. He perished by drowning in 1979 while swimming off the Brazilian coast. He never faced trial, never accounted for his actions. The Nuremberg doctors' trial, conducted between December 1946 and August 1947, prosecuted 23 German physicians for war crimes related to medical experimentation. 16 defendants were found guilty, 7 were executed. The trial produced the Nuremberg Code, 10 principles establishing ethical standards for human experimentation, beginning with the absolute requirement of voluntary informed consent. The history of medical experimentation at Auschwitz stands as testament to the catastrophic potential when human rights are subordinated to state ideology, when scientific inquiry proceeds without ethical constraint, and when persons are redefined as material rather than as moral agents deserving dignity and protection.